The Night Guard of Hollow Hall Museum Part 2. Chapter 9. The Mirror Room. The mirror hallway was one I had passed on my first night, but never entered. It had been cordoned off with a thick velvet rope and a sign that read "Closed for restoration." Behind it, the light had been dim, barely a glow at all, like the air itself refused to reflect. But tonight, the rope was gone. The sign had fallen to the floor. Or maybe it had been removed. The mirrors stood uncovered. All of them. I wasn't supposed to go in. It wasn't part of my patrol. But the whispering from the Hall of Portraits still echoed faintly in my skull, like an itch beneath my skin. I needed to see something normal. Something I understood. Something solid. But when I stepped into the mirror hallway, I realized I had made a mistake. The mirrors didn't just reflect light. They reflected memory. There were 6 of them. Tall, full-length, gilded in ornate wooden frames etched with faint Latin phrases, worn down from time and touch. Each mirror leaned back slightly against the wall, as though resisting the urge to fall forward. Their glass was tarnished, not quite clean, like something had been wiped away but not completely removed. The air in the hallway felt heavier, sharper, like breathing near broken glass. In the first mirror, I saw myself. Same uniform, same tired eyes, same flashlight held low. But as I moved, my reflection hesitated. Only for a second. But enough. It blinked just after I did. It turned its head slightly to the side as though listening to something I couldn't hear. And then it stopped copying me altogether. I stood frozen as the reflection slowly smiled, just the corner of the mouth twitching upward, before it returned to perfect mimicry as if nothing had happened. I turned to the second mirror. This one showed a younger version of me. Maybe 17. My hair longer, my shoulders narrower, a backpack slung over one arm. It was a memory. I reached toward the glass instinctively, and the reflection stepped back. I hadn't moved. My fingers hovered inches from the surface, but my image retreated as though startled, glancing behind itself at something just outside the frame. Then it looked at me, its eyes wide with warning. I staggered back. The third mirror was cracked down the middle. Not shattered. Just a single, perfect fracture, running from top to bottom like a wound. Through it, I saw a version of myself, smiling. Not a real smile. A stretched, broken expression. Lips pulled too far, teeth too white, too many. Like the grin had been carved into the flesh and held open. That version of me waved. And its hand was wrong, fingers too long, skin too thin, a black key held between its thumb and forefinger. The question mark-shaped key. The same one still in my pocket. I turned, heart pounding, toward the fourth mirror and saw nothing. No reflection. No glass. Just a black void, framed in gold. As I leaned closer, something tapped once from inside the darkness. I stumbled back, flashlight trembling. The fifth and sixth mirrors were worse. In one, I saw someone else entirely. A man in an old night guard's uniform, moth-eaten, 1950s cut. He stood still, watching me, then slowly lifted one hand and placed it flat against the inside of the glass. He mouthed a single word. Run. In the final mirror, I saw the curator. Standing behind me. I spun around. The hallway was empty. Silent. But when I looked back into the mirror, she was still there. Unmoving. Hands folded in front of her crimson gloves. Eyes pale as snowfall. Her mouth opened slowly, mechanically. And in the mirror, I heard her voice, not in the air, but in my mind. You are being remembered. Then the mirror cracked. Not just a fracture, it split in silence, a spider web blooming across its surface. The image distorted, then vanished. And with it, so did she. I fled the hallway. Back into the main corridor, back to something solid, something I knew. When I reached the guard room, I collapsed onto the cot, panting, my hands trembling. I didn't open the journal. I couldn't. But it opened itself. The page turned slowly, deliberately. A new entry formed before my eyes. J. Calder, seen by memory. Reflections no longer required. Begin assimilation. I tore the page out. Burned it with a match. Watched it curl and blacken in the metal waste bin. But when I looked back down, the page was whole again. Chapter 10. The Curator's Warning. I didn't leave the guard room the next day. Not once. The light outside never fully arrived, just a dim gray glow that hung above the trees like a dying breath. I tried the door twice. Locked, without explanation. Not from the inside. From outside. The curator had sealed me in. But not permanently. Because as dusk fell, the lock clicked open with a slow metallic snap, like a creature yawning before waking. The museum wanted me back on patrol. I stepped into the corridor cautiously, flashlight already warm in my grip. The air was thicker tonight, more humid, as though the walls had been sweating. And something else was different. The sound of the museum had changed. Before, it was a silence interrupted only by my own breath and the occasional shifting of air in distant vents. But now, the building hummed. A low, pulsing vibration beneath the floor, like a choir singing one long, unbroken note from beneath the foundation. It resonated in my bones, in my teeth. Something had awakened. I turned left, toward the east wing. As I passed the hall of portraits, I avoided the smiling man's eyes. The air still moved around that painting. Still exhaled gently when I drew near. I didn't stop. At the corridor's end, I turned to complete my loop, then froze. She was standing there. The curator. Backlit by an amber wall sconce, casting her long shadow across the tiles like a spider's legs. Her hands were clasped before her, crimson gloves brighter than ever against the dark of her coat. She said nothing. Neither did I. Not at first. I just waited. Eventually, she spoke. "You have seen what was not meant for you." Her voice was flatter now. Less formal. Almost tired. "You entered a gallery that did not yet exist." I tried to swallow the rising tightness in my throat. I didn't choose to. It appeared. She stepped forward. Her shoes made no sound on the tile. "It showed itself to you because you were being documented." My mouth went dry. "By whom?" The curator tilted her head, eyes glinting pale silver beneath her brow. "By the memory of this place. You must understand, this museum does not collect objects. It collects moments, people, choices, echoes of things too old to be named. When a visitor comes through the door, they are a guest. When a staff member is hired, they are an offering. And when a guard strays." She stopped. "They become an exhibit." The temperature dropped. I felt it in my fingertips first, numbness spreading like ink in water. "Then why am I still free?" I asked, quieter now. "Why let me walk the halls? Why not just put me in a case and be done with it?" She moved closer. Close enough now that I could see her eyes clearly. There were no pupils. Only mist. Light moved through her. "Because you are not complete yet. The museum has not finished remembering you." The humming beneath the floor grew louder. I could feel it through my boots now, rising in waves. Something enormous moving beneath the building's bones. The curator turned away, facing a dark archway that had not been there moments ago. "The route has changed," she said without emotion. "Follow it. Or become it. There is no third option." She stepped into the dark, vanishing between shadows that devoured her form completely. Gone. Again. Like always. I stood there for several minutes, alone except for the dull, pulsing breath of the museum. Then I turned and followed the new route. Not because I trusted her. Not because I believed it was safe. But because I understood something now. The museum didn't need locks. It didn't need chains. It only needed your memory. And once it started remembering you, you had no choice but to finish the story. Chapter 11. The Room That Bleeds. The museum guided me now. Not with signs. Not with sound. But with subtle shifts, corners turning where they hadn't before, lights flickering just long enough to draw my eye, shadows pooling in deliberate shapes that whispered this way. It didn't want me to finish my patrol anymore. It wanted me to see. So I followed. Because refusing the path would have meant standing still. And I had already learned, stillness is where the museum does its work. The hallway it led me down was unfamiliar, too narrow, ceiling too low. The sconces were old brass, shaped like curled fingers holding candles. They flickered as I passed, though there was no draft. No air. Just heat. Low, like a fever. At the end of the hallway stood a single arched door with no handle. Instead, a bronze plate was mounted where a plaque might be, engraved in ornate script. "The Last Supper of the Hollow Men." The door opened as I touched it. No sound, no resistance, and no air inside. It was a dining room. Massive, ornate, Gothic in scale and design. The kind of place you'd expect to find in an ancient estate, not buried deep within a museum no one could find on a map. The ceiling arched overhead with dark timber beams. A chandelier of wrought iron and bone hung low over a long, impossibly long, banquet table. There were no windows. Only mirrors, tall, tarnished ones, lining the walls from floor to ceiling, angled just slightly toward the table, as though the room were being watched from within itself. The air was wrong. Too warm. Too quiet. Too recent. And then I saw the table. It was set. Plates, goblets, silverware. Each seat marked with a nameplate carved into rotted oak. There were 13 chairs, each occupied by a mannequin or what I thought were mannequins. At first, they wore fine clothing. Velvet and brocade. Dusty from time, but otherwise intact. One wore a powdered wig. Another had spectacles, half shattered, perched on the bridge of a cracked, waxy nose. None of them moved, but none of them looked fake. Their skin was too detailed. Their hands too veined. Their fingernails yellowed, chipped, dirt under the edges. They had been arranged. Frozen in mid-conversation, heads tilted toward one another, mouths slightly open, as though someone had interrupted them, and they were all just holding their breath. The food on the table appeared fresh, still steaming in places. Roasted meats, glazed fruits, thick dark sauces congealing on porcelain. Bread torn mid-loaf, still soft at the center. A wine decanter tipped slightly to the side, as if recently poured. The smell wasn't rot. It was warmth. Savory. Spiced. Like a feast had only just begun. I approached slowly, hard hammering. My boots creaked on the wooden floor. One of the seated figures had his eyes half-lidded. I swore I saw them move, just slightly, to track me as I passed. No one spoke. But the mirrors whispered. They didn't reflect the scene accurately. In the mirrors, the table was empty. The chairs were still there. The food was not. And the figures seated around it were standing. Tall. Still. Facing the glass, as if watching themselves from the other side. My own reflection was missing. At the head of the table sat a tall man in dark robes. His face was obscured by a lace veil, like a mourning widow's, but heavier. His hands were clasped together over a thick, ancient book bound in chain. The page was open. The words were illegible, but fresh ink glistened on the page. And dripping from his hands. Blood. A slow drip, drip, drip. I followed the sound. It came from the edge of the table. A steady flow of dark red trailing off the white tablecloth, forming a thin stream that traced along the floor toward the center of the room, where it vanished beneath a cast-iron grate. Something below slurped. Something was drinking. I turned to leave. But the mirror shifted. I caught movement in my periphery, not mine. In the glass, the figures had begun to turn, one by one, toward the viewer. They moved slowly. Mechanically. No breath. No blink. Just heads rotating, mouths open wider now, arms lifting from the table as if ready to welcome a new guest. The book in the figure's hands began to close. The blood ran faster. Then I saw it, my name. My name on a 14th plate. At the empty chair at the foot of the table. Clean. Freshly carved. Still flaking with tiny curls of wood. J. Calder. The seat was pulled out, waiting. I ran. Out of the room. Down the corridor. Back toward the places I knew were real. The door did not close behind me. No lock. No resistance. It waited. Still open. Still bleeding. Back in the guard room, I slammed the door shut and turned the key twice. But I could still smell the food. Still taste it. And the journal? A new page. J. Calder has been served. Preparation underway. Final course. Memory. Chapter 12. Footsteps that aren't his. By the fourth night, I understood something awful. I was no longer alone. And I hadn't been for a while. It began subtly. A muffled sound. A rhythm too deliberate to be settling pipes or shifting beams. The kind of sound you don't hear at first, you feel it. In the base of your spine. In the corners of your ears. Footsteps. Soft. Slow. Measured. Echoing faintly behind my own, like someone following just far enough not to be caught, but close enough to never lose me. At first, I told myself it was the sound of my own boots doubling back against the museum's strange acoustics. The high ceilings. The curved walls. Maybe I was just hearing myself reflected in delay. But the longer I walked, the more it refused to match. I was crossing the east wing when it happened. For long corridors. No turns. No doors. I walked at a steady pace, flashlight casting a steady glow ahead. Nothing moved. I passed the same faded display cases of post-mortem photographs, surgical tools, and fractured clocks. Then I stopped. And the footsteps didn't. They took 2 more steps after I halted. Then silence. I stood still, breath frozen in my chest. Turned around. No one. Nothing. The corridor stretched empty behind me. The walls buzzed faintly with electricity. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat a thunderclap in the hush. I raised my flashlight and called out quiet, hoarse. Hello. The beam illuminated only dust and distance. And then I noticed something. The footprints. Not mine. In the dust to the side of the corridor, near the baseboard, ran a set of shoe prints. Old leather soles. Narrow. Longer than my own. They trailed alongside the path I had just walked, veering slightly to the right, as if someone had been walking beside me the entire time, just a step behind. I crouched, examining them closely. The dust was disturbed recently, too recently. I could still see the shape of the heel where it had pressed in. When I reached out to touch the nearest print, I found it was warm. That's when I heard the whistle. Not loud. Just two rising notes, like a tune half remembered from a dream. It came from the far end of the corridor. Not ahead of me. Beside me. I spun, flashlight flicking across the walls. The whistle repeated, slow and patient. Almost playful. A child's melody, maybe. But slower. Hungrier. I backed away. And then I heard it again. Step. Step. Pause. Step. And again, not mine. I broke into a walk. Not quite a run. Not yet. I turned left at the next junction, then right again through the hall of rotted maps, past display cases filled with torn atlases and navigation charts that led nowhere. The footsteps matched me again. They never hurried. Never closed the gap. They didn't need to. Because the museum was the gap. Back in the foyer, I collapsed onto the base of the grandfather clock, breath ragged, pulse hammering in my ears. It was 2:06 a.m. The pendulum swung, but the second hand didn't move. The journal was in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and flipped to the latest page, already expecting it to be waiting for me. It was. A new entry. He hears them now. That is how they begin. Not with speech, but with mimicry. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in the guard room with the lights on, listening to the hallway outside. And sometime around 4:22 a.m., I heard it again. A single footstep, soft and deliberate, on the other side of the door. Followed by a long, slow exhale. The same breath I had heard from the portrait. The same breath I had felt in the mirror room. Something out there knew how to walk like me. And soon, it wouldn't have to follow anymore. Chapter 13. A Portrait of Jay. The museum didn't sleep during the day. It waited. And by the fifth night, I stopped pretending that time moved normally inside Hollow Hall. The clock ticked. My watch rotated. But I had no idea what day it was. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't slept. I wasn't sure I needed to anymore. The museum was feeding me something else now. Fear. Memory. Recognition. I felt hollow and full all at once. Like I had swallowed too many names that weren't mine. The curator hadn't returned. No instructions. No warning. Only that humming beneath the floorboards, like something ancient clearing its throat. And so I wandered. Slowly. Carefully. Not straying, just searching. I wasn't sure for what. An answer, maybe. Or a reason. That's when I found the portrait gallery's upper tier. It wasn't accessible before. The staircase had always been roped off with thick black velvet, a rusted sign that read, Restricted Collection. Tonight, the rope was gone. The sign lay broken on the floor. The stairs led up into darkness. I climbed. Each step creaked, but not under my weight. It was more like they would remembered someone heavier, someone older. At the top, I emerged into a narrow mezzanine that overlooked the main hall of portraits. Dust clung to the air in floating spirals. The ceiling stretched above me like the inside of a bell, curved and black and endless. The portraits here were different, more intimate. They didn't depict nobility or guests or founders. These were quieter, sharper. They showed people caught in moments of suffering, a woman sobbing into her hands, a man with burned skin looking up in horror, a child clutching a candle inside a cell of iron bars. There were no plaques beneath these. Until I reached the farthest wall. There, hanging alone in a gilded, rotting frame, was a portrait of me. At first, I didn't recognize it. The man in the painting was older, by maybe 10 years. Gaunt, sunken cheeks, eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Stubble overgrown, uniform tattered, a hand pressed against glass as if trying to claw free from the inside of the canvas. But the face. It was mine. I moved closer. The nameplate was polished. New. Not even a trace of dust. J. Calder. The final guard. I stared. My throat tightened. My skin burned cold. The painted eyes, my eyes, were fixed not on the viewer, but slightly off-center, as though staring over your shoulder. Like he could see something approaching behind me. In the face, it wasn't just afraid. It was resigned. I backed away, breath short, heart hammering. I didn't remember posing for it. I didn't remember being painted. But the detail was exact, too exact. A mole I'd had removed. A scar on my hand I'd gotten when I was 12. Even the frayed edge of the collar I tore on the first night. This wasn't just a portrait. It was a record of who I would become. I turned to leave. The hallway was longer now. Twisting. The other paintings had shifted. Their subjects stared directly at me now. Eyes wide. Unblinking. In the air. The air breathed. Softly. Wetly. Like lungs in the walls. Back in the guard room, I didn't check the journal. I knew what it would say. I could feel it writing beneath my fingertips. I could hear the scratching of the quill. But as I lay on the cot, the curator's voice echoed in my mind, low and cold. You are not being painted. You are being remembered. And memories have frames. Just like portraits. Chapter 14. The Pale Children. After the portrait, the museum began to feel colder. Not physically, though the air had grown dry and sharp, but in its intent. As though something within it had stopped pretending to be curious and had begun to take notes. That night, I walked my patrol route like always. East Wing. North Hall. Clock Tower. Foyer. But the museum didn't care about the route anymore. It wanted to play. I first heard them near the exhibit of disused toys, a section of the East Wing I'd passed many times but never dared enter. The displays always made me uneasy. Cracked porcelain dolls with glass eyes, wind-up animals with rusted keys, tiny velvet dresses suspended on wire forms. But tonight, the hallway called me. Not with whispers. With laughter. Not loud. Not joyful. Just a thin, breathy giggle, rising and fading like the last air escaping a punctured lung. I froze, flashlight held steady, beam dancing off the glass displays. Every doll seemed to lean a little more forward than usual. Their eyes caught the light like predators watching something cornered. I heard it again. Giggling. From the dark. Close. And then, a single sound that made my skin crawl. Tap. 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 A small object bouncing off the tile floor. I turned my flashlight toward the sound. A marble rolled from the far end of the corridor. Perfectly round. Pale blue glass. It spun lazily toward me, then slowed, then stopped 2 inches from my boot. Nothing else moved. I crouched, carefully, and reached out. Before I could touch it, a soft scuffling echoed behind me. Tiny feet. Quick. Bare. I spun around, nothing. But the laughter returned, now behind me again. And then I saw them. Handprints. Faint but unmistakable. Smudged into the thick dust coating the display case beside me. Small, child-sized palms, dragged downward across the glass as if someone had pressed against it and slowly slid down. I backed away. Slowly. Carefully. More prints began to appear. On the walls. On the floor. On the glass. Dozens of them. Small, perfect outlines in the dust. Some just fingers, as if grasping. The marble at my feet rolled again. Backwards. Against the slope of the floor. That's when I saw the first face. Peering from the other side of the toy exhibit's glass, barely visible behind a row of miniature rocking horses. A pale child's face. Translucent. Hollow eyes. Mouth too wide. Hair floating, though there was no air moving. She tilted her head, then vanished. A second face appeared at the opposite end of the room. A boy this time. Wearing a paper crown. Mouth sewn shut. Gone in an instant. Then another. And another. Too many. They weren't in the museum's records. There were no plaques for them. No portraits. No mention of children ever being part of the exhibit. But they were here. And they remembered me. I ran. Out of the East Wing, back toward the foyer, past walls that seemed to lean in as I passed. As I turned the last corner, the light flickered, and standing in the center of the hallway was a small figure. A child. Dressed in funeral black. Face hidden by a veil. She raised one pale hand and slowly pointed behind me. I didn't look. I bolted for the guard room. When I slammed the door shut, The marble was already there, sitting on the cot, waiting. I picked it up. The glass inside shimmered faintly with color, like storm clouds behind ice. At its center was an eye. The journal sat open on the desk. Fresh ink. No sound of writing. Just presence. The new entry was short. They liked you. They never left. They only want to play. Beneath it, in handwriting not mine. Don't answer if they knock. And just before dawn, as the light began to return. They knocked. 3 times. Small. Soft. Waiting. Chapter 15. Locked in. When the first gray breath of morning filtered through the stained glass windows, I made a decision. I was going to leave. Not out of fear, though I was afraid, but because I could feel something closing in. The museum had stopped showing me horrors. Now it was remembering me into them. The pale children. The portrait. The footsteps. The dinner table with my nameplate carved in wood. Each night pressed a little deeper, reached a little further. It wasn't haunting me. It was preparing me. I packed what little I had. The flashlight. The journal, though I didn't want to bring it, I couldn't leave it behind. The key shaped like a question mark. And my phone, even though I hadn't seen a single bar of signal since arriving. The plan was simple. I'd walk to the gates, force them open if I had to, and follow the dirt road until I hit civilization, or at least something with a map, or noise, or sky that didn't feel like it was pressing against my skin. But as soon as I opened the museum's front doors, I understood. It had never intended to let me go. Where the gates had once stood, where I'd first walked in beneath rusted iron bars and dead ivy, there was now only stone. Thick, gray, brutalist blocks of granite and mortar stacked 12 feet high. Seamless. Clean. No gaps. No cracks. No gate. No way through. It wasn't just locked. The museum had been walled in. I ran the perimeter of the building, hard hammering, boots crunching through brittle leaves and overgrown gravel. Every archway, every hidden side path, every rusted emergency exit sealed. Windows had vanished. The back loading dock was gone entirely, as though it had never existed. Even the air felt thicker, like breathing through gauze soaked in dust and memory. Back at the main entrance, I tried calling 911. No signal. No carrier. Just static and a frozen loading screen that never moved. I opened my camera to snap a photo of the walls, proof I wasn't imagining this. The app opened to the gallery instead. And what I saw made me go cold. There were photos already on my phone. Dozens. Dozens I had not taken. Dark, grainy shots from angles I had never stood in. Images of the museum's exhibits. The hall of portraits. The child in the veil. My own face, sleeping in the guardroom. In one image, I stood in front of a mirror with no reflection. In another, I was sitting at the dinner table, the one in the bleeding room, knife and fork in hand, had tilted downward as though in prayer. My nameplate in clear view. I dropped the phone, stared down at it. The screen lit back up on its own. The gallery cycled through more photos automatically. And then, a new image appeared, taken just seconds ago. It showed me standing exactly where I was. The image was darker, though. And in the background, just beyond my shoulder, stood a figure in red gloves. I spun around. No one. Just the doorway. Just wind. Just the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the distance. I retrieved my phone, hand shaking, and shoved it into my pocket. I didn't care how long it took. I had to find an exit. Even if I had to tear the walls down brick by brick. I returned to the East Wing's service hallway, a place that might have once connected to a basement or delivery route. The air was colder here, damper, like something lived beneath the floor. But the hallway didn't lead to the basement anymore. It led to a dead end. A solid, windowless wall where, I was certain, a staircase had been just days before. Someone had rebuilt the museum around me, reshaping it as I moved, sealing me deeper with every step. No signs. No exits. Just endless hallways that now looped back on themselves when I wasn't watching. Back in the guard room, I pulled the journal from my pack, already knowing what would be written. But I didn't expect photos. 4 of them, inserted between the pages like pressed flowers. All black and white. Grainy. Old. The first showed a man in a night guard's uniform from the 1920s. He stood smiling in front of a display of gas masks. The smile didn't reach his eyes. The second, a woman sitting on the edge of a cot in a small room. The same cot I was sitting on now. The third, a tall figure in the curator's coat, standing in a mirror, but her face was covered in gauze. The fourth. It was me, sleeping, in the exact position I'd been in last night. Below the photos, the page read, "There are no exits for memory. Memories are kept. You are now on permanent exhibit." I sat there, listening. Somewhere far off, I heard the chime of the clock again. Only this time, it rang 14 times. Chapter 16, The West Wing opens. For nights, the curator's warning had echoed in my mind. Stay out of the West Wing. But tonight, the lock was gone. No click. No key. Just an open door, breathing cold air and shadow into the main corridor. The brass plaque that once read, West Wing, sealed archive, now bore fresh lettering. Authorized exhibit, memory assimilation in progress. The hallway beyond was dark, longer than the museum should allow, and lined with crimson carpet, damp in spots with something I didn't want to smell. Still, I stepped through. Because I had to. Because the museum no longer asked me what I wanted. The moment I crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. The walls were stone here, not plaster, not decorative. Raw and old, like the bones of a structure never meant to be walked again. The light flickered above me. Old gas lamps, guttering against air that didn't move. The corridor curved slightly, and I followed its bend until the passage opened into a gallery, a large, domed chamber with no windows, only candlelight and silence. At first glance, I thought I was alone. Then I saw them. Figures. Dozens of them. Not moving. Not breathing. Not human. They stood in niches along the walls, spaced precisely, posed in different scenes. Some stood at attention. Some knelt. One lay curled on the floor, hands over his ears, mouth wide in a silent scream. Each was dressed in a security guard's uniform from different decades, collars and cuts changing from era to era, patches aged and faded. Names embroidered on the chest. Dates scratched into plaques beneath their feet. Harold D. 1957. B. Wren. 1894. L. Mora. 1938. Unknown, no entry. There were 36 in all. And at the far end of the room, placed on a raised marble dais beneath a single shaft of ceiling light. One final figure. His uniform was recent. The same make as mine. A patch still stitched onto the sleeve, worn but intact. His face was my face, but older, more withered than the portrait I had seen upstairs. His expression locked in a moment of wide-eyed terror, mouth parted as though frozen mid-breath. One hand was lifted toward the ceiling. The other clutched something tight to the chest, a journal identical to mine. The plaque at his feet read, J. Calder, final attempt, incomplete. Beneath it, carved more recently, a line had been added in shaky script. Memory failed. Rerun initiated. I staggered back, breath caught, spine frozen. They weren't wax. Not entirely. Their skin was too textured. Their fingernails too brittle. The stubble too inconsistent. I looked closer at Harold D., at L. Mura, at unknown. And I saw it. Their eyes. Closed, but not sculpted shut. Eyelids. Real. Soft. Wrinkled. The figures weren't posed. They were preserved. The air began to shift. From beneath the dais, I heard the faintest hum. Not mechanical. Not musical. Electrical. The floor vibrated slightly beneath my boots. A projector flickered on in the wall beside the display. No sound. Just light. It cast a video loop on the far wall. Grainy footage of a man, me, walking the halls, checking doors, pausing in front of the hall of portraits. Then again. Then again. A loop. 30 seconds. On repeat. Over. And over. And over. I turned to run. The door I'd entered was gone. The wall had sealed. Only a narrow path ahead remained, one I hadn't seen before. As I approached it, a red velvet rope lifted on its own, inviting me through. And at the entryway, a new sign. New exhibit in progress. Do not disturb. Back in the guard room, I found the journal already open on the cot. The page had turned on its own. A new line written in calligraphy I didn't recognize. The guards are not hired. They're grown. Memory requires repetition. Exhibit preparation, 82% complete. And just below it, another edition, smaller. Please return to position. Outside the door, I heard the curator's voice. Not speaking. Humming. That same lullaby I had heard in the dark. Only now, it was coming from within me. Chapter 17, Gallery of Eyes. I didn't remember walking back to the West Wing. I didn't remember sleeping. I didn't remember deciding anything at all. But the museum had made the decision for me. The velvet rope lifted itself. The path narrowed. The humming grew louder. I stepped forward because what else was there to do? The door behind me was gone. The only way out of Hollow Hall was forward and downward. The passage beyond the dais spiraled into darkness. Not total, but thick. Saturated with a dull red glow that pulsed from somewhere behind the walls, like a heartbeat buried in stone. My flashlight had stopped working sometime during the last patrol. I kept it in my hand anyway, an instinct, maybe. Something to hold on to. Eventually, the passage ended at a black wooden door. No lock. No handle. Just a small phrase, carved roughly at eye level. See what they saw. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the smell of paper and brine hit me like a wave. And then I saw the walls. Eyes. Dozens. Hundreds. Thousands. The room was small, no larger than a bedroom, but every inch of wall, floor to ceiling, was covered in living wallpaper, hand-painted with blinking eyes. No repetition. No symmetry. Each eye unique. Different iris colors, different sizes, shapes, human and not. But they weren't just painted. They moved. The blinking was slow, mechanical, rhythmic. They didn't blink all at once. Instead, they blinked in strange clusters, left corner, top right, center, then back. As if scanning. The center wall bore the largest eye. Nearly 3 feet wide, its pupil a deep obsidian black. It blinked once every 7 seconds, lashes fluttering faintly in a breeze that didn't exist. And every time it blinked, the room seemed to shrink. I stepped inside, heartbeat spiking. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the door closed behind me with a soft click. I tried to speak, but my throat had gone dry. All I could do was stare. The air buzzed faintly, like static on an old radio. And then one of the eyes began to blink in rhythm. Not randomly. Deliberately. I squinted. Top left corner. A green eye with a sideways pupil, like a goat's. It blinked. Once. Pause. Once again. Pause. Twice. Pause. Once. The sequence repeated. Morse code. I knelt and pulled the journal from my bag, flipping to a blank page. I counted the blinks, jotting down the code. My hand shook, but I translated it slowly, line by line. D-O-N-T. B-E-C-O-M-E. U-S. Don't become us. As I read the final word, the room responded. The eyes widened. All of them. At once. The painted pupils dilated. The lashes trembled. A scream billed in the silence, not with sound, but with pressure. My ears rang. My skin tightened. It felt like 1,000 gazes had sunk into my bones, watching every heartbeat, every breath, every doubt. I staggered backward toward the door, only now it had no seam. No handle. The room had become a sphere of vision, no entrance, no exit. Only sight. The journal's pages flipped on their own. A single phrase appeared in wet, red ink. It sees you seeing it. The center eye blinked. And blinked again. The walls rippled. Every eye blinked faster. Erratic. Twitching. Like they were struggling to stay closed or to open wider than their pain allowed. I closed my own eyes. And that's when I heard the voice. Inside my skull. Not spoken. Pressed. We watched too long. We remembered ourselves. And the museum doesn't like that. I opened my eyes again. The largest eye now had a crack running through it, like glass under pressure. Behind it, I saw movement. Something writhing. Limbs without form. Or maybe memories reshaping. I turned back to the wall behind me. A new door had appeared. Scratched into its surface, in hundreds of tiny etchings, was the same message repeated over and over. Don't become US. Don't become US. Don't become US. I opened the door. Light flooded my vision. And behind me, the eyes all blinked, once. In unison. As if satisfied. Back in the corridor, I found myself gasping. Cold sweat soaked my uniform. I checked my pocket. The journal was gone. Only the page I had written the translation on remained, folded neatly. A single word had been added to the bottom, not in my handwriting. Noted. The story may end here. But the darkness never sleeps. Like this video to keep the shadows stirring. Share your whispers in the comments. Your voice shapes the next nightmare. and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Gothic Hour Stories and Mysteries, where every tale lingers and every soul leaves a mark. The Gothic Hour awaits.